Hi, everyone. Let's start talking about chapter 5. In this chapter, we're talking about early Christianity, the beginnings of a world religion. Uh, you know, I mentioned at the beginning of this course that this section of history actually focuses so much on religion, just because religion gives a community moral values and kind of ritual traditions, that sort of thing, that help build culture, and culture helps build our laws and that sort of thing. So that's why we're focusing on so much religion. We'll also be looking at Islam this semester as well. So let's get started with Christianity. We're starting at the time period of the crucifixion of Jesus, and then we're going all the way up to 529 when Saint Benedict founds the monastery. Okay, so Christianity has its roots in Judaism, or the Jewish religion, from the first century BC. So Judaism was dominated by four groups. There were the Sadducees that were religiously conservative, the kind of upper class Jewish people. The Pharisees, they were interesting because they allowed interpretations of Mosaic law and were more liberal. So when we talk about Mosaic law, we're not talking about like arts and crafts mosaics, where you're getting little pieces of tile and sticking them together. We're talking about Moses, the laws of Moses. So specifically the Ten Commandments. So the Pharisees allow for interpretation of those commandments, which is a more liberal response. The Essenes believed that the end was imminent. They were kind of these doomsday sect. And the Zealots engaged in acts of resistance toward Rome. So Jesus, at this particular time, taught the moral transformation of the individual. Jesus taught that ethics were the core of Mosaic law, but he felt like the values of prophecy were overshadowed by being so strict to stick to those laws. And for that reason, the Jewish leaders saw Jesus as a disruptive kind of renegade that was setting himself above the law. In terms of the origins of Christianity, St. Paul is the person who really took Christianity from a Jewish sect to a world religion. St. Paul said that Christian messages applied to everyone. And that meant everyone, despite your social class, despite where you were, who your family had been, their importance in terms of the community, that Christianity applies to everyone. And he traveled extensively and spread this message throughout the eastern part of the Roman Empire. He taught that Jesus was a risen Savior who offered the only true hope for humanity. And he taught that Jesus superseded Mosaic law. So the laws of Moses were the focus of the Old Testament. Jesus then is part of the New Testament. So here is a mosaic, not to be confused with Mosaic law, like we were just talking about, where Christ gives the law to the saints, Peter and Paul. And this is in a cathedral in Rome. So Christianity was appealing at this particular point because it comforted people. Human problems during the decline of Hellenism, you might recall we were talking about, the fall of the empire. We have people who are, desolate. Their land has been taken over. It's a dire situation. So we mentioned in, I guess, the last chapter, maybe the previous one too, that there was a return to the mystery religions, and Christianity was kind of part of this mystery religion movement because the mysteries are, the idea of faith, because you can't see God and you can't see Jesus as such. So there's this idea that there's this mystery about them. So when I refer to Christianity as a mystery religion, I absolutely mean no disrespect at all there. But Christianity also presented the idea of an intimate relationship with the higher world. So It gave acceptance to people who might not have had acceptance from people around them. It gave acceptance from a higher being. And because the Christianity community was growing, then there are more and more believers that are following this. And so, as more believers follow it, then this relationship spreads throughout communities. So, we have these large communities of Christians that are now working together, accepting each other, and believing that they're all entitled to God's salvation. Oops, I jumped ahead. Let's go back here. So, the universalism of the Roman Empire helped spread early Christianity. You know, the Roman Empire was huge. And so being able to spread it among the empire meant that more people were exposed to the idea of Christianity. Initially, Romans blamed Christians for their troubles, but when that did not stick, the Roman authorities reversed course and actually sought the support of Christians. The Hellenization of Christianity used rational thought to transform the religion to theology. So that is how we start seeing Christianity introduced into Greek philosophy. Greek philosophy had to sacrifice the ability to think freely to the requirements of this Christian revelation. So the idea of rational thought was actually used to put these beliefs of Christianity into a logical kind of theology that people could accept. So the scriptures suggested that Peter, who was the founder of the church in Rome, was the foundation or the rock of the church. And so for that reason, you hear Peter often referred to as the rock of the church. And we start to see a rise of monasticism. So monastics are people who retreated from worldliness. They were these groups of Christians who wanted to leave behind the secular world. Um, think of like convents for nuns and monasteries for monks. So it's not as developed at that time. A lot of times these people would get together and just go into the wilderness and live away from other people for a while. And they would work together in order to have food and shelter and that sort of thing. But it was the whole idea of retreating from worldliness. And a lot of that sticks with the ideas of monasticism today, or monasteries. The monastic rules were developed by Saint Benedict. So there were disputes, as you might imagine, with Christianity, and some of these disputes are still argued today. Some argued that the Gospels and the letters from Paul were all written years after the crucifixion of Jesus. They were written very long after the fact. If you have ever watched any kind of crime show, they will tell you that they want to get witness testimony right away because it's fresh and you might overlook something, and your mind, given time, your mind has time to kind of justify things so that maybe something that stood out as very strange one particular day may seem very normal, 5 years from now when you rethink about it. So that's one of the reasons that these gospels and letters from Paul were really pulled into question. Um, and Arius argued that Christ was not fully divine. So the people who followed Arius were called Arians. They were not the kind of Arians that we talk about today. Okay, so Arius and his followers believed that Christ was not fully divine. Why was that? Well, it's because his mother was human. So according to Arius, at best, Christ would be a demigod, half man, half God. So the Council of Nicaea was called, and they established that God and Christ were co-equal and co-eternal. So the church established that God and Christ, as co-equal and co-eternal, then that Christ would be fully divine. So there were some other things with Christianity in terms of attitudes that came up. Christians initially were very hesitant to go to war. And eventually they started helping assist in the defense of the empire. But it was only after they were convinced that it was to help defend Christianity. Because the idea, I mean, think of one of the Mosaic laws, right? Thou shalt not kill. So if you're killing in defense, then they started looking at that as different. The Christian views of women were patriarchal or focused on men, but everyone was still considered a child of God. So, yes, the system was established at that time that men were in control of the church and men were, in positions of power, women were not, but everyone was considered a child of God. The Christians identified their opponents, and that was pretty much anyone who wasn't a Christian. So the Jews were their opponents, the pagans were the opponents, the heretics, people who believed some elements of Christianity, but not all of them. And they identified all of their opponents with Satan, Satan obviously being the ultimate opponent to Christians. And this whole view of cosmic struggle between good and evil led Christians to demonize their adversaries. So, like I said, it's not just that Jews were people who believed differently. Suddenly, Jews were the enemy, or pagans were the enemy, and the heretics were the enemy. And throughout the formation of the church, there's a lot of reference to heretics, and we'll be touching base on some of those as we go along through the semester. This is a mosaic of St. Paul. Okay, St. Augustine, or St. Augustine. So many ways to say it. So here in the South, if you see these words, Augustine, and you're talking about grass, you're probably thinking St. Augustine, because everyone wants that thick, luscious St. Augustine grass in their yard for a nice, thick, carpeted lawn. However, St. Augustine is what you will probably hear me say. I tend to go back and forth on those. Either are correct, but just for the sake of distinguishing the name Augustine from Augustine, the grass, I'll try to stick with Augustine. See, I almost did it again. Okay, so St. Augustine was the most significant early Christian theologian because he saw that these concerns, worldly concerns, were very minor, because he felt like the biggest concern was that only a few souls were going to enter the kingdom of heaven. So from this, we get the idea that it's very important to do missionary work. It's very important to spread the gospel. And Augustine taught that reason had to be guided by faith. So you have people who are debating reason versus faith. Do you follow faith or do you follow reason? The things, the empirical evidence, things that you can see and hear and note and follow and study, or just kind of go with your heart. So Augustine says that you can't have reason without a degree of faith. And that ties these two together, and it makes Christianity work for those who question the guidance by faith. I love this picture. It's called the Ladder of Divine Ascent. It's from the 12th century, and it's in St. Catherine's Monastery in Mount Sinai now. But you can see here, this really kind of depicts the medieval worldview of the universe. We have God in the upper right corner with his arm down, welcoming people up into heaven. And then we have all these little demons down below. And you notice they're not like all the way down below. They're kind of between heaven and earth. So you don't have to be in hell to experience demons. They're all around. And you can see that they're trying to pull people off the ladder. They've got these little arrows. They've got these spears in one place. They've lassoed some of these monks and they're pulling them down. And the idea of this shows just how easy it is to be pulled down because or to be pulled down off your walk toward living a good life because you have all of these little demons attacking at all times. And it just shows how the the walk up the ladder can be very treacherous. I can't talk treacherous, and also very, just so very dangerous in the fact that not only do you have the height that you're dealing with, but you have all of these little attackers constantly. So let's talk about alternate worldviews during this time of Christianity. So humanism and Christianity worked very well together because they found the value and worth in the individual. Remember, the Christians believed that every individual had the right to have a personal relationship with God. And in classical humanism, this whole idea that all people were equal, then these two work together really well because this whole idea of equality of humanism and then the worth of the individual taught by Christianity really worked together well. So Stoics and Christians could really agree on this inherent brotherhood of man. And Christianity's dominance over humanism shifted the goal of life from worldly excellence to service to God. So now we're not so worried about the attainment of things and worldly riches as we are to service of God. So through that reason, Christianity really helped shape the European Middle Ages. And this is a funerary sarcophagus that shows a lot of different scenes, but one of them is Christ sitting on the throne, which is in the top section here. And just a quick last look at the spread of Christianity. This map shows the extent of Christianity around 300 AD, the dark blue areas. And then look at the areas Christianized up to 800 AD, the light blue. That's a huge, huge area. And you can see here that this area converted to Islam in the 7th century. So I'm looking forward to us talking about that as well. All right, so those are the notes for chapter 7. That was quick. You do have a video to watch with this week's information too. So don't forget to watch the video as well.